Ohio is seemingly as red as ever following last week's election results, with Republicans maintaining their lead in Ohio's U.S. House delegation and sweeping down tickets statewide. But the only Democrat currently holding statewide office there claimed a third term on Tuesday and says his victory is proof progressives can win in America's heartland. Newly reelected Democratic Governor Sherrod Brown joins us now. Congratulations. Very good to have you. So the Republicans did have such a good night in Ohio. What do you think made your win so convincing as a progressive Democrat?
Yeah, as a progressive Democrat, and you can fight for workers and respect the dignity of work, as I do, and fight for workers whether you punch a clock or swipe a badge or work for a salary or work for tips or whether you're caring for an aging parent or raising children. I respect the dignity of work. I think that's what Washington forgets about. And voters will vote for a strong progressive who I don't compromise on civil rights. I don't compromise on LGBTQ rights or worker rights. And you can do that and stand up for what you believe. And I think Ohio showed that on Tuesday.
Now, Mike Barnicle, it reminds me of Joe Biden at that bar in Pennsylvania, just saying we need candidates who represent all of us. Hard to do, though, in a state that Republicans won so overwhelmingly.
Yeah, and Joe Biden doesn't even drink. We should point that out. But Senator Brown, let me ask you, you're in a tough position. You're in the minority going back into the United States Senate. You know all the issues better than most. You know it's important to this country and to people, regardless of their party in this country, infrastructure, health care costs, things like that, education for their children. But you, more than most senators, also know what it's like, because you live an ordinary life back in Ohio. When you stand in line at the drugstore and look at the shock on people's faces when they're confronted with the copay for their prescriptions that are so phenomenally expensive, what can be done on that you think might have a bipartisan shot of passing?
Oh, I think there are a number of things that we should do. First of all, we should negotiate drug prices directly with the drug companies. One of the things we do at the Veterans Administration, and today, obviously, we celebrate Veterans Day. I appreciate earlier what Andrea and what David said about General Mattis and troops at the border and honoring the men and women in uniform today and those whoever served our country. But we negotiate drug prices on behalf of 7 million veterans directly, the VA directly with the drug companies. We ought to do that for Medicare. Because a big part of what's driving healthcare costs is the cost of prescription drugs. We should be able to purchase drugs on the open market as long as those countries around the world have an FDA equivalent, as Canada does, as a number of countries do. So there are a number of things we can do. We should not allow the deductibility of drug company advertising. Why should taxpayers subsidize? No offense, because of the time of day it is, but all the drug company ads on the Morning Joe show.
Yeah.
Senator Donny Deutsch, it's a pleasure to talk to you. Congratulations on a brilliant campaign. And it wasn't about being a Democrat or Republican. You kept your eye on the ball and what's right for the voters, and they responded. Having said that, what I'm concerned about the Democrats going forward is them taking their eye off that ball about education, about health care and infrastructure, and focusing too much on Trump and impeachment and indictments and in subpoenas. What advice would you have for your fellow Democrats to, on the one hand, obviously hold the president accountable in ways he needs to be, but not taking their eye off the ball, what voters really care about?
Well, I'd go back to the winning campaigns around the country that helped us take the House. I'd go look at my campaign in many ways as a blueprint, not just to govern, and I don't mean false modesty here, but not just to govern, but to prepare for 2020, a blueprint where the focus is on workers. And regardless of what kind of work you do, whether you swipe a badge or whether you work for salary, on a salary, that putting workers first, looking for what we do as a nation to support those who work and get the cost of prescription drugs down and do infrastructure. Keep our my campaign. I don't agree on much of anything, only a couple of issues with the President of the United States. But my campaign was about workers and about this, with the direction we go. I think that's what we need to do. There will be investigations in the House, as there should be, but Democrats do need to focus on those winning campaigns around the country where we talked infrastructure, we talked healthcare prices, especially keeping drug prices down, and we focused on a middle-class tax cut, not a tax cut that blew a hole in the budget and then Mitch McConnell turns around and wants to cut Medicare and Social Security to pay for it.
All right, Senator Sherrod Brown, thank you so much. Congratulations.
Thank you. Thanks,
To an update now on the Mississippi Senate race. Yesterday, video surfaced of a Republican senator from Mississippi cheerfully saying that she would attend a public hanging if a supporter invited her. Senator Cindy Hyde-Smith, who's competing in a runoff for a full term this month, made the comment while praising a supporter on November 2nd. Take a listen.
I would fight a certain song for me if he invited me to a public hanging. I'd be on the front row.
The footage went viral. And Hyde-Smith responded, quote, "In a comment, I referred to accepting an invitation to a speaking engagement. In referencing the one who invited me, I used an exaggerated expression of regard, and any attempt to turn this into a negative connotation is ridiculous." I actually just don't know who makes a joke like that. That's boggles the mind. The campaign of her Democratic opponent, Mike Espy, who has served as Mississippi's first black member of Congress since Reconstruction, called Hyde-Smith's comments reprehensible and said they have no place in our political discourse in Mississippi or our country. They have no place in joking either. It's just not a joke. You don't joke about hangings, public hangings. Still ahead, we'll get the very latest out of Florida, where the race is on to recount ballots. Republican Governor Rick Scott is accusing Democrat Senator Bill Nelson of fraud, but state officials don't seem to agree with that. That is coming up on Morning Joe.
Thanks for checking out MSNBC on YouTube, and make sure you subscribe to stay up to date on the day's biggest stories. And you can click on any of the videos around us to watch more from Morning Joe and MSNBC. Thanks so much for watching.